Hi, good afternoon. My name is Susan Oxby. I'm the Director of Film and Senior Film Curator at the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive. And this afternoon, we host a live stream conversation on the new film, Edo Avant Garde, which was made in 2019, a really striking art documentary. And one of the most beautiful aspects of this film is that the care that's given to its own production, and also how it offers viewers a chance to see the artistry behind the tradition of Japanese screen paintings from the Edo era, 1603 to 1868. This afternoon, we're joined by Linda Hoaglund, who's the director of Edo Avant Garde, and Dr. Yukio Lippit. By way of introduction, I would like to say that Linda Hoaglund was born and raised in Japan by American parents, and she's a bilingual film director and producer. She has an interesting body of work in the area of nonfiction, but in the area of topics that relate to US-Japan relations. One of her other notable involvements is her work as a translator. She's translated some 250 Japanese films from Japanese into English, and has worked with many of the most esteemed Japanese filmmakers. Dr. Yukio Lippit is at Harvard University, where his research and teaching interests center around Japanese painting of the medieval and early modern eras. He also is a specialist in the area of the history of Japanese architecture. His award-winning book, Painting of the Realm, The Kano House of Painters in 17th Century Japan, is just one of his many publications. And I encourage you to look below on our site here today for lengthier bios for both of our special guests this afternoon. But I just wanted to open up our conversation by asking Linda and Yukio to tell us how they got to know each other. Linda, maybe let's start with you.
Oh, thank you. Yes, in my life, it seems that one film leads to another. I had a film from 2010 called ANPO Art X War about the 1960 democratic uprising in Japan that I told through art. And there was a screening of it at Harvard, which Yukio attended. And to my eternal shame, I don't remember meeting him then, but I think at the time I was foolishly uninterested in Edo era art, of which he is an expert. So it's not an excuse, but then he was so kind to forgive me for that tremendous faux pas by responding when I wrote him to ask him to write an introduction to a recommendation for a grant for Edo Avant Garde. So I'm so grateful that he agreed, and then even agreed to serve as the film's advisor. Yukio, would you like to tell your side of my impudence?
Well, sure. Let me just add that the film I went to see by Linda, ANPO Art X War, I think the screening was in 2010 or so, about 10 years ago at Harvard University, was remarkable. It was a film that was extremely timely because it was interviewing and engaging a lot of artists who were active in the era, who were part of the protests and the Japanese avant-garde, who were elderly. And, it was a passing generation. It had a remarkable vision. And you get, I got a sense of Linda as a filmmaker with tremendous conviction. And it was only later that I found out that she had this kind of very unusual path to filmmaking. It was, well, let's just say it wasn't a kind of a mainstream kind of go to film school and build a career kind of thing. She had a circuitous route, and we both had some similarity. We both went to Japanese public schools and worked in the English language sphere. And for me, it was easy to accept a very kind invitation to be in dialogue with Linda as she began to make this film, Edo Avant Garde.
Right. Okay, well, I also wanted to set this up for anyone who's joining us this afternoon and hasn't yet had a chance to see Edo Avant Garde, made in 2019. It's a film that runs, I think, 83 minutes. And I thought a nice thing we could do is to play the opening 4 minutes of the film, just to give all of our viewers a chance to get the flavor of the film. before we begin to talk about different points. And also to mention that this film is currently available on the BAMPFA website, bampfa.org, under our recent releases section of films that we're hosting as virtual cinema. So I'll ask our colleague Dave Taylor to play the opening clip from Edo Avant Garde.
What we have here, I think, is one of the most incredible perspectives I've ever seen in a Japanese screen. What is the viewer's perspective supposed to be?
Great. Great, beautiful. So I thought we could start by talking about the origin of the project and all of the research that I imagine went into this. Linda, I understand that this film project is one that you worked on for more than 4 years. So maybe you could first tell us how you came to this topic as a film.
Before I do that, I just wanted to highlight one thing for any educators who are watching, or for anyone who's watching who knows an educator. I'm delighted to announce that with funding support from the Japan Foundation, the film's website, which I think Dave is going to put into the chat so you can reference it there. It's just edoavantgarde.com. Now has a link for educators to look at the first in a series of 4 educational modules that K-12 teachers will be able to use in their classrooms. They're very smart, sophisticated educational modules developed by Brenda Jordan at UPitt. The first module is about why Edo artists created so much innovative art. And I hope that you'll recommend these modules. They're perfect for educators who teach children of all ages. And I think your students will have a lot of fun with them. Okay, so how I came to this project. As Yukio mentioned and Susan mentioned, I actually grew up in Japan. My parents were actually missionaries. And so I grew up and they raised us in provincial Japan and made the unusual decision to send their daughters to Japanese public school. So my Japanese is sort of alarmingly fluent, at least for people who don't expect someone who looks like me to speak Japanese. So I grew up very familiar with Japanese culture and language, but I was not, I was really quite dismissive of sort of Edo era and pre-Edo era art. It was simply ignorance on my part. I just somehow came to dismiss it as either decorative or just traditional. But actually, this time I was at Yale and I was showing another film called Things Left Behind, which is a film about Hiroshima, but told through the photographs of Ishiuchi Miyako. I happened to have some time and I stopped by the Yale Art Gallery and they happened to be hosting an exhibition of byobu, which is the Japanese name for the large folding screens that you'll see in my film. And one of them just stopped me in my tracks. It was a very highly stylized depiction of waves and boulders and gold leaf clouds. And they were so stylized that it almost looked like an abstract painting to me. And then I looked at the label and it said it had been painted in 1600. And I was so shocked. And that's where the phrase Edo avant-garde popped into my head. And from there, I started research. Susan, do you have a follow-up question or?
Well, I mean, could you speak about, I mean, one of the great things is that your film takes us to such a remarkable range of art institutions, cultural institutions, to private collectors, to temples where screens are on display. But this is, I can only imagine the amount of time it took to research this project and all of the experts that you've tapped, including Yukio Lippit at Harvard University. Maybe you could give us a sense of how you approach the research for the project.
Well, I guess the number one answer is with great humility. I was approaching the mother lode of Japanese art treasures as a complete ignoramus. So I had to, and I knew that I had to be extremely, extremely careful, which is why, of course, I needed the brilliance and the expertise of someone like Yukio to guide me through. You know, there are fakes, just like in contemporary art, there are fake Edo era art as well. And I am certainly not versed enough to tell a fake from real Edo art. But the way I started researching it, and that led me on a really interesting discovery, is that I started by Googling some of the prominent artists' names in English and Googling them in Japanese. And a completely different set of images appeared depending on what language I was Googling in. And this led me to the understanding that museum collections in Japan and museum collections by the same artist are completely different and often actually don't really refer to each other. So then, because this was about the time when all the major American museums were putting all of their collections, their catalogs online, I was able to review online tens of thousands of works of art. And from those, I collected about 1,000 that, to my mind, fit the criteria of what I call Edo avant garde. Now, this is just me making up a category. Nobody else refers to it as Edo avant garde. But in my mind, the definition or the criteria is that the artwork is pushing the boundary of what was prevalent at the time, and whether or not it was intentional, innovating new artistic depictions and techniques. And of those 1,000, ultimately, I was able to get permission to film 200 of them. And in some cases, I was able to get incredible access to private collections where the collectors and, of course, the curators at all the museums were incredibly generous.
And Yukio, were you seeing the film as it was developing in rough cuts, or were you?
Yes,
Yeah, go ahead.
yes, occasionally I saw portions, and I spoke with Linda about, her research and different collections. And I would just, add that from my perspective, what was interesting about this period of research is what I would call the salvage archaeology that was necessary to get the filming done, because in the Edo period, these are all paintings that would only have been shown for very specific occasions for brief durations of time. So they're not permanently on the walls as many famous oil paintings would be in, early European museums. They operate according to the principle of occasional display. They're just opened up for the duration of a social visit, a tea ceremony, a poetry gathering, a religious ritual, and then they're put away. They're made of very fugitive materials that can be easily damaged by light and other conditions. So they're difficult to gain access to, and sometimes when they're on display for an exhibition is the time you can go to the museum or the private collection or the temple and get a chance to do the filming. So I think what was remarkable was the way in which all of these obstacles were overcome or incorporated into the very dynamic and somewhat zigzagging way in which the film developed.
And Linda, I'm curious, were there cases where you couldn't gain access to works that you would have loved to have included, or were you getting a lot of yeses?
Well, I had so many choices that honestly, I was grateful for a no when I got it, because it just meant, ultimately there can only be so many works of art in a film until it starts to feel just like you're thumbing the pages of a catalog. And so I was grateful, but there were very few no's. And I also just thank you, Yukio, for helping me to remember that I made the film in stages. As I got one grant, I would film one exhibit or one time in Japan. As I got another grant, I filmed another segment. And so it really was in stages. And so yes, it took a while, but so the film took shape as the yeses came in and the money came in.
Great. Well, maybe this is good to segue into the next topic about how you developed the film project, and especially the visual character of the film, because I think anyone who has seen Edo Avant Garde realizes that you're in no way thumbing through the paintings. That one of the great things about this film is that we really get to see the screen painting and scrolls. So first, let's hear something about the cinematographer that you worked with, Kazumatsu Norimichi. Linda, please tell us about this extraordinary cinematographer.
In a moment, we'll see Kazumatsu and I filming an azalea bush. This is actually near Harvard in the Arboretum. And so Kazumatsu-san is an amazing cinematographer who's been nominated 5 times for the Japanese Academy Award for cinematography, and he's received it once. I met him years ago when I was subtitling the films made by Sakamoto Junji. Kasamatsu filmed many of his films, and we became friendly. And before I started to make Edo Avant Garde, I said, you know, I'm making this film. Would you consider filming it with me? And he said yes, which was not the reaction he had when Quentin Tarantino asked him to film, to be the cinematographer on Kill Bill. To that, the answer was no. So I consider myself incredibly fortunate. And I, you know, in that opening scene that you showed, when the gates of, that is a temple called Honenin, and when the temple gates are opened by the monk and then the camera pushes in, this is not the move of a documentary cinematographer. This is the minute he began pushing in, it's as though with his camera, he's saying, we're going to tell a story now, come with us. And in that moment, I just felt this is going to be the opening of the film. And so I remain so grateful to Kasamatsu-san, who was with me all the way. And, you know, from shooting a close-up of an azalea to rivers, to bamboo, to the artwork, and his incredibly beautiful, smooth dolly work. You know, many of the folding screens, most of them we filmed on what are called dolly tracks, which are parallel tracks, and the camera goes on top of it at a very low angle in order to simulate seeing the screens from sitting on the floor as they would have done during the Edo era. And Kasamatsu-san makes dolly track filming look easy. Trust me, it is not. And he makes it look so smooth, and knowing when to make the curve to keep, and this camera, his assistant camera woman, who was so incredibly talented, keeping everything in focus. You know, it's the mark of a great craftsperson that makes everything look easy. And so I'm so grateful to him.
Yeah, and it's the film, I understand, he was using a Sony 4K camera, and
Yes.
lots of use of super slow motion close-ups. Yes. But I think that's one of the amazing things about the visual character of your film, is that we really can see these screens in a way that's, you know, so special to really getting a sense of the artistry of the painting. Were there any stories about working with the crew on this project? Surprises, well, or?
My co-producer is Takaaki Okada, and he was able to help us get permission to film National Treasure. It's called Red Plum, White Plum. It's a National Treasure folding screen. And we were able to get permission to film it in the museum. It's the Museum of Atami. And this is actually, we filmed it in their conference room with just a little bit of natural light streaming in through tall side windows. To my understanding, no one has ever gotten permission to film National Treasure in such incredibly generous conditions. You know, they can only be the definitions, not the definitions, the regulations surrounding a national treasure is that at least if it's a folding screen, it can only be exhibited 30 days out of the year. Certainly not with anything, even indirect lighting, not in a conference room, in a museum. And being able to film that national treasure in that way so shocked the producers at NHK, the Japanese national broadcaster. They said, how on earth did you get permission to film a national treasure like that? And I said, well, that'll just have to be my secret. But I think it's part of what persuaded them to co-produce the film and provide the additional funding that I needed. There was also, in addition, we've already seen the gates at Honenin. Then we have the Nisonin candlelight shot, so Nisonin is a beautiful temple in the Arashiyama area of Kyoto that has a residence that was built for the emperor or I guess the most recently passed emperor, to visit his sister's grave. You can't see the residence in all its glory, but the miracle that happened was that I was able to film a folding screen And really, this one is a national treasure caliber folding screen by Maruyama Okyo that, to my knowledge, had been in the Kyoto art dealer's family for centuries or decades, but had never been exhibited in public. At least I've never seen any reference to ever having been exhibited in public. And in his very Kyoto formal way, I sort of got down on my hands and knees in extremely formal honorary Japanese and said, it's been my dream to be able to film a folding screen in candlelight. Could you make this possible? And he said, of course. That was his only response. And when I got there, there were the old style Japanese candles. There was this incredible folding screen that no one had ever seen before by Maruyama Okyo. And he lit the candles himself. Needless to say, this would have been absolutely impossible in any museum setting for museum security and many, many other reasons. And this was really the holy grail, in a sense, for my film, because these were painted centuries before the invention of electricity. And my goal was to try to take the viewers back into the Edo artists' imaginations and how they might have seen nature in order to depict it this way, and how viewers at the time might have seen them, might have enjoyed them.
Yeah, no, I think there's marvelous work in the film at getting at this idea of different types of perspective that we see in screens, how there could be one view of a screen from the left angle or from the right angle or head on. And Yukio, I wonder if you want to comment on any aspects of how these screens were seen in the day, or how they may be seen today by viewers, and maybe how this film is giving us something very special.
Yeah, sure. I mean, one of the things that I really admire about the film and Linda's kind of approach to, the cinematography and the filming is that these are really complex objects. They were, as I said, only displayed occasionally, and they were seen from a sitting position on the floor. It was inconceivable for someone in the Edo period to walk into a room like we would into a museum, stand with their arms folded, scratching their chins, gazing at these works. They were essentially half artworks, half furniture, which were used to partition space and carve out temporarily new space cells within the open plans of traditional Japanese architecture. And they were unfolded in irregular ways. So that led to this multiplicity of perspectives. And their compositions, furthermore, didn't presuppose a single fixed viewing position. They weren't the famous Albertian window of the Italian Renaissance, in which a painting is supposed to open up is supposed to be viewed from a specific position and looks out onto a world. They anticipated multiple viewing positions. They could be unfolded in different ways. So they're extremely complicated objects, depending upon the time of day, the gathering, the season, the interior, the lighting. They could be very different works, which are catalytic of very different viewing experiences, depending upon how you encountered them. And one final comment is that sometimes they weren't even viewed. There was no culture of public exhibition at the time. They were always brought out for discrete audiences, small groups at a time. And they were complementary to various kinds of activity that took place in front of them. But that activity wasn't always geared towards simply contemplating the screen. That's why it's a really interesting question to look at this. This is a screen titled Trees, but what does it mean? Is it trees? Are we supposed to sit here and look at the trees? Is it complementary to something going on in front of it? Is it meant to be, kind of catalytic of certain forms of poetic recitation, or serve as a backdrop to a specific kind of gathering or ritual? We oftentimes don't know the answer to a lot of these questions, but that's what makes this so rich and interesting, is precisely its ambiguity and its kind of multiple personas. I think that's what's captured so well in the film.
Yeah. So I'm wondering if we could move on to a discussion of the kind of the variety of painting techniques used by Edo era painters. And to get us into this topic, maybe we could move to the next clip, which comes from about the 51 minutes into the film. And just a reminder to the three of us to stop our videos during the clip. And so let's move to the second clip.
Because Sotatsu uses the technique of tarashikomi. You have this sensuous feeling of these creatures merging in and out of clouds.
Harashikomi ink work is wet on wet ink. You start off with very light layers of ink wash. Before it dries, you apply darker ink. And then they spread out and intermingle. It involves very careful composition, but it also involves exacting execution. You can't make mistakes because it's not like oil painting. You can't paint out the ink painting mistakes.
「水しぶき」を表現するためにスパッターしてますけれど、20世紀の絵でいうとジャクソン・ポロックのアクションペインティングじゃないんですけど、そういうのをご覧になるとどう思われますか？300年400年前から。
20世紀以降の美術史から見るとその前衛的な試みを先取りしているように見えるかもしれないし、でもそれは自然のいろんな条件を考えた時にはもともとあってよかった発想のような気もするんです。例えば雨なんかもそうですけど、みんな重力で地面に向かって吸い込まれるように落ちていく。でそのことを絵の中に取り入れようということは、決して実験的なことではなく、自然な営みとして受け入れられる部分があったんじゃないかと思うんですね。いかなることも起こりうるのがやっぱり自然だと思いますし、そこからエネルギー力を得ようとすればさまざまな試みが発想されると思うんですね。
So Yukio, I'm curious if you could comment on some of the painting techniques from the Edo era. And as well, one thing that I'm wondering about is across that period from the early 1600s to the mid 1850, 1868, were there periods within that where there were new developments and styles within the broader time frame, or were artists influencing each other?
Yes, there were tremendous innovations and developments over the course of the Edo period. The Edo period spans 250 years. It's largely peacetime. It's a prosperous time full of urbanization. And so you see, remarkable developments in painting, and there's a lot of diversity. We tend to think of Japanese Edo painting in terms of a national tradition, Dutch masters, Spanish Golden Age, but in terms of the breadth of what was created, the myriad different schools, studios, urban centers of painting, and what has survived in good condition, it's more like early modern Europe as a whole. That would be the kind of appropriate parallel here. In terms of the techniques that we've seen, it's an interesting, I think, visually dynamic combination of two very different sets of techniques. One of water-based ink painting, which was showcased wonderfully in the images we just saw of the dragons and clouds screens. And this is water-based. It requires a long apprenticeship, mastery of brushwork, but also a mastery of accidental effects, of letting the ink and the paper kind of do things that guide the work. It's kind of like the painter being so masterful that they're able to give a little bit of agency to the cosmos in the generation of the work and guide it to completion. And the second set of techniques involve very bright mineral pigments, which are ground up from various kinds of, azurite and malachite to generate bright colors, which are applied, bound with animal glue and usually applied over gold foil, which generates the more kind of abstract polychrome types of work, such as the image that you see here. And I think it's the intersection between this polychrome set of techniques and this monochrome set of techniques that really generates the dynamism and diversity of Edo painting.
And I wonder if we could hear a little bit about some of the ideas of modernism in Japanese screen and scroll paintings, but also what were some of the sources of inspiration for the artists?
I just wanted to highlight one of the sources of the inspiration. So in my film, early on, my Japanese producer said, you are going to have to limit the types of art that you select for your film, because otherwise we'll be completely overwhelmed. There's just too much, as Yukio just said, oh yeah, let's take on all of early modern European painting in one film. Well, that's not possible, which is why you won't see any woodblock prints. You won't really see any painted human figures. What you will see, 99%, is images of the natural world in many, many artistic approaches, folding screens and hanging scrolls. But the part of the reason why I focused on this is that especially the folding screens depicting the natural world offer the most dramatic contrast to Western European paintings that portray landscapes and other natural phenomenon. This one right now is when I discovered this, I was flabbergasted. It's just called Barley Field, in part because of the humbleness of painting a barley field, but making it looks like a compositional sheet of music with colors that somehow bring Impressionism to mind. But I felt it was really important to acknowledge the drastic difference between the Judeo-Christian traditions in Europe, which puts the human being at the center of everything, and the Shinto animist and Buddhist practices that were foundational to everyday life in Japan. And I say this as a bit of a joke, but not really, to say that when an Edo artist saw a frog, he saw a living creature with a spirit, because of Shinto animism, that they believed there were spirits animating all creatures and all aspects of the natural world, but that the frog could also be grandfather because of the Buddhist belief in reincarnation. Now, this is not going to be featured in one of Yukio Lippit's lectures at Harvard. And I say it partly to be funny, but this leads to what for me was a really dramatic revelation by one of the Japanese scholars, Yamashita Yuji. He said, you know, when they were painting a puppy, when Maruyama Okyo painted a puppy, he wasn't painting to have a perfect delineation of the exterior of the puppy. He was also painting to show us why human beings are so delighted by puppies. So I like to say that the Edo era artists opened their hearts to nature and they painted what their hearts saw. So frequently they were less interested in verisimilitude. Maybe, you know, maybe Sotasu's heart saw a dragon in the clouds, maybe not. But I think this idea of opening our hearts to nature is actually something that I hope we're doing more of these days, as nature, as she will, sometimes has her own agenda that we're all now living with. And I think the Edo artists, partly because they were constantly overwhelmed by natural disasters, whether it was active volcanoes or tsunamis or floods or fires that ravaged the large cities that were all built of wooden structures. I think they were much more in tune with and in awe of nature, along with opening their hearts to puppies. I don't know, Yukio, would you like to correct anything I've said wrong?
No, I think you articulated it wonderfully. You know, it is remarkable how much animal imagery is a part of these painting traditions of the Edo period. And you know, one of the interesting things that I would add to what Linda just said is that you know, the rather than the external appearance, one standard for artistry of this time is to show the thing in its kind of embeddedness and connectedness to the world, to somehow show a motif, an animal motif, as reflecting the flux of the universe and the cosmos. And that kind of form of connectivity is a very interesting kind of eco-critical way of thinking about the world and all of, you know, all of the natural things in it. And, you know, it's a really interesting question also about that opens up onto questions about cultural memory and fundamentally what paintings do. Edo society was very literate, and many people shared a kind of poetic traditions, memorized traditions, which featured, you know, centered around motifs of the natural world as a way of communally acknowledging the passage of time. Poetry was like cultural memory. It was like shared cultural memory, which is internalized and recited and transmitted. And painting was very much a part of this kind of multisensorial, poetic, shared cultural memory revolving around images in the natural world. And they were also auspicious. Too, you know, paintings weren't so much allegorical as we sometimes expected for paintings in other traditions, but they were meant to do things. They were meant to bring about felicitous results, you know, good tidings, longevity, prosperity, multiple offspring. They were meant to kind of do things for the future. And there was a lot of, I think, hopes and, you know, wishes for a good life that were freighted onto these adorable animals or ferocious dragons that you see in Edo painting.
One of the points made in the film is this idea of a God's eye perspective. And can you connect that back to a particular tradition or religion within Japan, Yukio? Or could you comment a little bit more about that aspect of the work?
Sure. Well, you know, as we discussed earlier, these works are really interesting in terms of how you're supposed to look at them. They anticipate kind of multiple perspectives or a roving eye, and ultimately, you know, the one of the very, very large philosophical concepts behind that is that the universe is creatorless, and it's just, you know, it's just the will of the world. The world has kind of a way of intervening and doing its thing. It's its own way or path, and that's a very difficult concept to grasp quickly. It's not the perspective of a creator looking down literally, but it's a kind of it's just a kind of a heavenly view. And kings are chosen because of the mandate from heaven, because the heavens speak, and in this way there is just a will that belongs to no one and everyone a perspective that belongs to no one and everyone at the same time.
And anticipates Google Earth View by about 4 centuries. While we're at it, I just throw that in because of your question about modernism and what is modern. And I mean, I'm sure Yukio will have a much more scholarly perspective on this, but I guess for me, I use the word slightly provocatively, this word avant-garde, for us to rethink what is modern, and that somehow history has some linear progression so that we're more modern and therefore more better and more progressed today. I just wanted to go back and look at these screens to rethink what we think of as modern art. And as you know, in the film, we trace sort of the impact that some of these artistic practices had on, especially on Impressionism in Europe, and also quite directly to some of the Gutai painters from the 1950s in Japan, who were quite aware of the artistic and religious practices of the Edo era painters and strove to bring them into play to conjure the powerful spirituality and the drama of the screen paintings.
Yeah. I think we should set up the next clip, but also to connect on this idea of how Edo Avant-Garde, the film, is relating the Edo period with modern art, and also, the amazing way in which improvisational technique or the use of text and image are done. I think we'll see this in the next clip, and we can talk about it on the other side.
日本語のビジュアルな特性と日本の美術のありようっていうのはすごく密接な関係があると思いますね。もともと絵巻物っていうのは絵があって文字があって、で場合によっては絵の中に文字が書き込まれている場合もある。で僕特に一番好きなのはね、鶴の下絵の和歌館っていうね、宗達が鶴を描いてね、光悦が和歌をずっと書きつけて。お互いに認め合ってたしね、仲良かったんだと思うんですね。であれ本当に幸せなコラボレーションなんですね。
この作品についてこれどういう出来方をしたんだろうというようなことを考えていて、書がすごくゆったりの幅のところもあればすごく詰まってる部分もある。 36種のうちの2種忘れてたのそこに後で書いてるのちっちゃい文字で。そのイレギュラーな感じというのはおそらくある場所で一緒に行った作業なんだろうと。そういう即興性が、見て取れる絵なんですよね。近現代和歌館のパフォーマンスだったんじゃないかということを私自身は今そういうふうに考えてるんです。描いてるとこを見てる人たちがいたとしたら最初の鶴のくちばしをちょんとやった時なんだっていうそれがこうだんだん分かってくる時の面白さというか。
Beautiful. Yeah. I'm sorry, what museum is that displayed in, that scroll?
That was at the Kyoto National Museum. I'm not able to start my video.
Oh, there you go.
Okay, start my video. Here we are. Sorry about that. That was in the Kyoto National Museum at a historic exhibit of what was called Rinpa work. And as Yukio can probably attest, you know, the Kyoto National Museum is not set up to say yes. So I was incredibly fortunate to be able to film that screen as exhibited after hours with dolly tracks. And then of course I had also been incredibly fortunate to be able to capture those cranes in super slow motion with Sony's amazing 4K camera that they generously donated for this production.
Wow. Wow.
Cranes actually all birds moved at 10 times the speed of humans. So, and Sony's camera can slow it down to 10 times. So we were actually able to capture the birds in flight and going about their daily lives in a way that we can actually appreciate the gracefulness and subtlety of their movements. Which somehow I feel that without Sony's camera, the artists were already able to somehow see. I'm not quite sure how or why, but that amazing sort of synchronicity between the Sony's images that we filmed and, you know, the Sotatsu paintings, the cranes, they kind of, to me, they look the same. So anyway, that's why we edited that scene that way.
Yeah, it's a really lovely example of just how beautiful your film is, Linda, and on so many levels. Really thoughtful use of relating the artwork, the beauty of the artwork, to the natural world, where its inspiration is drawn. A change of gears, I know, but Yukio, I wonder if you could give us any sense of the art market for the screens and scroll paintings. It comes up a little bit in the film. It would be. Is there something you could tell us in a nutshell? And then I know we've got a couple of questions that are coming up in the chat that we can move on to after that.
Well, there's a lot to say here, but one of the interesting things about this field of Edo painting is that some of the greatest examples are found overseas in American museum and private collections and in European collections. Of course, there are many in Japan, and you know, that is really a legacy of primarily the late 19th, early 20th century, and it's become very difficult to I think acquire a major piece. So the pieces that you see in Linda's film today. But one of the things that the exodus of these works from Japan generated was a very, I think, good system. I mean, really viewed as a model internationally of designating cultural patrimony within Japan. So a system of designating national treasures and important cultural properties, which means that the government, through these designations, wherever the works are kept in Japanese collections, will provide funding for their care and make sure they're well preserved. And so it's now there is a very good system of, I think, overseeing the works, conserving them, and making sure that they are studied and appreciated in the venues in Japan.
Amazing. It's I'm sure love to hear more on that in a whole other session. Let's see, Linda, here's a question coming up about curriculum use of your documentary film. What are the next steps for the historical and artistic content presented in your film? And can you elaborate as to what the curriculum would look like and why it is important to teach this curriculum in the USA? And why do you believe it should start, or what age would it start from in terms of a good age to introduce?
Well, if you go to the website, EDOAvantGarde.com, you'll see there's a red tab that says Edo Art Educational Modules. And there is an educational module with images and embedded video for elementary school. It's developed by very smart, sophisticated art educators. And there are actually, believe it or not, in that one educational module, there are 6 lesson plans, all relating to having students of different ages try to think about creativity and innovation and art and what does it mean. And I think that it's really important, even as major American museums grapple with the question of diversity, grapple with the question of inclusivity, for young American students to be exposed to masterpieces that they've probably never seen before, and very dramatic contrast to the standard Western canon that they're going to mostly encounter either in art textbooks or in museum visits. So I really hope you can take advantage. There'll be 3 more modules, sketching from nature, how Edo art impacted manga and anime, which I'm sure will be very popular with various high school students, maybe junior high school students, and also the roles of Shinto and Buddhism, and the role that played in Edo era art. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'm glad to see this second question coming up. Could the speaker say something about the soundtrack where traditional Japanese instruments, etc., being used? I'm glad this question is coming up because you do such a nice job with the sound.
Well, I'm very spoiled. My composers who composed the music and performed most of it have been with me from my very first film. So I'm incredibly spoiled. They're both graduates of the Berkeley School of Music, and they could compose for orchestra. He is an amazing, Satoshi Takeishi is an amazing percussionist. Shoko Nagai, who works with him, is amazing on vocals and piano and many other instruments. Although in this case, for the most part, we decided that we wanted to use traditional Japanese instruments to accompany the Edo art. And then I think we mostly went with the guitar for the Western art so that it could be clear in the audience's mind and ear, the very distinct tonalities and ambience provided by the music.
And for the score, did that come in after the film was edited, or were you?
No,
you mentioned earlier that you worked in modules on this film, so.
No, but I'm incredibly spoiled. As I said, I would show them works of art, and they would just compose music for that work of art. And before we'd even started filming, they would just say, "How does this sound, Linda?" I would show them a scan. I know that Satoshi told me that. There was a photo of the crows. It was a close-up of all the black crows on gold leaf. I said to Satoshi, I really want to feel like I'm hearing them flapping and flying. And he said, you know, we tried a lot of different things, but the thing that worked best was the sound of my hands tapping on my knees. So we recorded that and distorted it. And that's part of the track that you hear accompanying this Crows, which is an unsigned piece of work from, I believe, the early 1600s. It's in the Seattle Art Museum.
All right. Well, if we are coming up on the hour, I did want to mention something that I could have said right off the top, which is, of course, Linda, your film is being released during the COVID-19 period, but you did have a screening at the Vancouver International Film Festival in the fall of 2019. And I don't know if the film has played in other festivals during this last year.
It played, the Seattle Art Museum hosted a screening, 300 people attended. And then we had one last minute screening at Goucher College. Ruby Ranson was my indefatigable assistant, and she goes to school there. And so she arranged a screening. And the professors after the screening said, you know, I think because it was in a hall on a large screen, and they couldn't believe that the students never looked at their phones during the screening. And they said, you know, I think the students are now so spoiled by the richness of images that it actually took your 4K stunning images to just get them to focus. So I hope that it is a pretty stunning film to see on a big screen. And I hope that once we're moving on, whenever that is, that there can be more screenings so that we can enjoy it in the dark, sitting next to people again.
Oh, indeed. And here I see a question coming in from Janice Murata. Why did they use so much gold leaf in the images?
Yukio, that's your question.
Yeah.
Great question. You know, one of the I would say there are many reasons. This of course, gold is wonderfully decorative. It provides an abstract ground that's into which the viewer can kind of imagine or complete images and so forth. These are also works that are viewed oftentimes indoors where natural light doesn't penetrate enough. And this is, of course, an era without electric lighting. And so the gold actually refracts and extends the light in wonderful ways, very sensitively. And I should also add that it's not just one type of gold. Many times in these works, there may be gold leaf with a second layer of gold leaf with cut in the form of clouds and so forth on top of it. There might be gold paint. There might be gold foil that's sprinkled, or what's called dust, which is filings that are you know, cut into such small shapes they resemble this kind of just mistiness. And they manipulate the degree of pure gold versus a silver or copper, so the gold can be red or it can be bluish. They really knew their gold. They could pound it into ever more microscopically thin layers, and it created all kinds of very subtle lighting effects depending upon where you stood in relation to the painting. Different sheens and hues would come out. It would have a different kind of fractal effect depending upon where you were and what time of day it was.
Fascinating. Anything else we want to touch on before closing out?
I just wanted to also add that if you go to the website, edoavantgarde.com, there are also, even if you're not an educator or a student, there are a list of the artists and their major artworks, and you can, you know, learn their names. And if you have a favorite, you can start to track your favorite artist. But there are also recommended list of books to read, including an amazing catalog of Ito Jakuchu that Yukio curated called Colorful Realm. The catalog itself is very difficult to come by, but maybe it's in your museum. This was an amazing exhibit at the National Gallery in Washington that Yukio made possible, of these incredible scrolls by Ito Jakuchu, who I feature early in the film. But there's also several really interesting smart books that help us reconsider nature and the intelligence and the consciousness of nature. I recommend a book. There's one book by an amazing Dutch animal behaviorist called "Are We Smart Enough to Understand How Smart Animals Are?" And who really does some very smart thinking about the way that humans are potentially jealous of maybe how intelligent animals are. And so we've suppressed research. There's a book called The Genius of Birds, which is a compilation of all the research done in the last 30 years and how some birds can memorize where they hid acorns in 2,000 discrete locations in one area and remember them even after the snow has fallen. Sometimes we can't remember where we put our car keys or our door keys, so try 12,000 discrete locations in the middle of a desert or a mountain. And then there's another book that's actually turned into now a new documentary film called The Hidden Life of Trees, how they feel and what they think. An amazing book by a German author, arborist, who helps us to understand that the trees don't move, as fast as we humans do, but they are profoundly networked with each other through a kind of intelligence that we can't imagine. And I would just go back to that, your question about the God's eye view. I really appreciated Yukio's insight about how it was a creatorless universe that they imagined. But I think also they may have imagined that there was an intelligence beyond their comprehension. And the paintings, some of their paintings were an homage to try to show respect to that consciousness or universe or cosmos or whatever word we can't come up with because we can't imagine it.
Wonderful. Well, I want to mention to anyone who may be coming across this art discussion that we've just had, that you can visit the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archives website and to find our film streaming platform where Edo Avant Garde is currently on and continues for the next couple of months. You can access this pretty much from around the world. So we're really, really grateful to filmmaker Linda Hoagland, to Dr. Yukio Lippit from Harvard University for your time this afternoon and for making such a beautiful film. I also want to thank the BAMPFA staff members, Dave Taylor, Nat Reese, and Doug Ketelis for the back end help today on this discussion. It's been really great to chat with both of you, and thank you.
I also want to thank you. And everybody at your wonderful staff who have been so supportive of the release, the online release of this film. And thank you so much for selecting my film. It's a great honor. Thank you.
Our pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, we're